Well, hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. Our topic for tonight is our choice, fascism versus inverted totalitarianism. I should say that I originally planned to schedule the foreign policy long show for tonight, but it turned out that we weren't able to coordinate quite the way we wanted to. So Dee had scheduled a show for 9 p.m. And so I decided to shift the days of my foreign policy show. And I thought I would do this topic tonight, fascism versus inverted totalitarianism. And tomorrow I will do the IR show. So that's the way it's going to be this week, a little different from the way it normally is, but not really too different. So with that as an introduction, let me go to the comments. I thought maybe there would be a few because there are some people here, but nothing yet. So, I'd like to start our topic for tonight by going to the Wikipedia page on inverted totalitarianism. It's a pretty good article. It's been there for a long time. And it's a pretty good source for giving some of the basic ideas. So, it starts with the definition. Inverted totalitarianism is a system where economic powers, like corporations, exert subtle but substantial power over a system that superficially seems democratic. Over time, this theory predicts a sense of powerlessness and political apathy, continuing a slide away from political egalitarianism. So basically, that system is one which has been taken over by corporations. In that sense, it is similar to fascism. But it's different in the sense that the characteristics of fascism are not present as much as they are in fascism. Let's continue on with the article. Sheldon Wallen coined the term in 2003 to describe what he saw as the emerging form of government in the United States. He said the United States was turning into a managed democracy, similar to an illiberal democracy. He uses the term, quote, inverted totalitarianism to draw attention to the totalitarian aspects of such a system, while the term inverted helps to portray the many differences with classical totalitarianism. Wallen had some theses writing on inverted totalitarianism from 1960 to 2008. Very, very long career for Sheldon Wallen. I read his book, Politics and Vision, in graduate school soon after it came out. He was a striking thinker. He argued that the United States is increasingly totalitarian as a result of repeated military mobilizations to fight the Axis powers in the 1940s, to contain communism during the Cold War, and to fight the war on terror after the September 11th attacks. He describes this development toward inverted totalitarianism in two conflicting political power centers. namely the constitutional imaginary and the power imaginary. Wallen speaks of imaginaries to include political tendencies as well as existing political conditions. He explains. He explains a political imaginary involves going beyond and challenging current capabilities, inhibitions, and constraints regarding power and its proper limits and improper uses. It envisions an organization of resources, ideal as well as material, in which a potential attributed to them becomes a challenge to realize it. Ballin explains that the constitutional imaginary prescribes the means by which power is legitimated, accountable, and constrained. Referring to Thomas Hobbes, he understands the power imaginary as a quest for power that is rationalized by fear of collective mortality. The power imaginary may undermine or override the boundaries mandated in the constitutional imaginary through fears of a dangerous enemy. Quote again, a power imaginary is usually accompanied by a justifying mission, quote, to defeat communism, unquote, or, quote, to hunt out terrorists wherever they may hide, unquote, that requires capabilities measured against an enemy whose powers are dynamic but whose exact location is indeterminate. The power imaginary does not only reduce democracy within the United States, it also promotes the United States as a, quote, superpower, unquote, that develops and expands its current position as the only global superpower. Does that really clear things up? I'm not sure. Quote again, though, while the versions of totalitarianism represented by Nazism and fascism consolidated power by suppressing liberal political practices that had sunk only shallow cultural roots, superpower represents a drive towards totality that draws from the setting where liberalism and democracy have been established for more than 2 centuries. It is Nazism turned upside down, quote, inverted totalitarianism, unquote. While it is a system that aspires to totality, it is driven by an ideology of the cost effective rather than of a, quote, master race, Herrenvolk, by the material rather than the ideal, unquote. Similarities to classical totalitarian regimes. Wallen argued that the similarities to classical totalitarian regimes include using fear, preemptive wars, and elite domination. Here are some differences with classical totalitarian regimes. First, in terms of revolution, while the classical totalitarian regime overthrows the established system, inverted totalitarianism instead exploits the legal and political constraints of the established democratic system and uses these constraints to defeat their original purpose. Government. Whereas the classical totalitarian government was an ordered, idealized, and coordinated whole, inverted totalitarianism is a managed democracy which applies managerial skills to basic democratic institutions. For example, I add a bit here. In 2024, the Democrats have been managing their presidential primary by preventing any competition to Joe Biden to arise. basically either tolerating certain groups that have only small donors behind them and not much of that, and attempting to focus on only one other group other than the Democratic Party. That is, of course, the Republican Party, which is characterized as being highly totalitarian. Propaganda and dissent, Wallen argues that while propaganda plays an essential role in both the United States and Nazi Germany, the role it plays in the United States is inverted. That is, American democracy is only in part a state-centered phenomenon. According to this model, dissent is allowed, though the corporate media serve as a filter, allowing most people with limited time available to keep themselves apprised of current events to hear only points of view that the corporate media deem serious. Democracy, whereas the classic totalitarian regimes overthrew weak democracies, inverted totalitarianism has developed from strong democracy. And the United States even maintains its democracy as the model for the whole world. Here's another long quote from Wallen. Inverted totalitarianism reverses things. It is all politics all of the time, but politics largely untempered by the political. Party squabbles are occasionally on public display, and there is a frantic and continuous politics among factions of the party, interest groups, competing corporate powers, and rival media concerns. And there is, of course, the culminating moment of national elections, when the attention of the nation is required to make a choice of personalities rather than a choice between alternatives. What is absent is the political, the commitment to finding where the common good lies amidst the welter of well-financed, highly organized, single-minded interests, rapidly seeking governmental favors and overwhelming the practices of representative government and public administration by a sea of cash. In the area of ideology, inverted totalitarianism deviates from the Nazi regime as to ideology because it favors profit, not white supremacy. Economy, in Nazi Germany, the state dominated the economic actors, whereas in inverted totalitarianism, corporations, through lobbying, political contributions, and the revolving door, dominate the United States, with the government acting as the servant of large corporations. This is considered to be normal, quote unquote, rather than corrupt. Inverted totalitarianism is also built on nationalism. While Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy were nationalistic, inverted totalitarianism is a global superpower based on global exchange of jobs, culture, and commodities. The people, while the classical totalitarian regimes aimed at the consistent political mobilization of the populace, inverted totalitarianism aims for the mass of the populace to be in a persistent state of political apathy. The only type of political activity expected or desired from the citizenry is voting. Low electoral turnouts are favorably received as an indication that the bulk of the populace has given up hope that the government will ever significantly help them. I think that is the state of things here in the United States. Punishment. While the classical totalitarian regimes punished harshly imprisoning or killing political or ideological opponents and scapegoats, inverted totalitarianism in particular punishes by means of an economy of fear, specifically minimizing social security, busting unions, outdating skills, outdating jobs, outsourcing jobs, and so on. In the area of the leader, while the classical totalitarian regimes had charismatic leaders that were the architects of the state, inverted totalitarianism does not depend on a certain leader, but produces its leaders who are akin to corporate leaders. Social policy. While Nazism made life uncertain for the wealthy and privileged and had a social policy for the working class, inverted totalitarianism exploits the poor by reducing health and social programs and weakening working conditions. The superpower claims both democracy and the global hegemony. Democracy and hegemony are coupled by means of managed democracy, where the elections are free and fair, but the people lack the ability to change the policies, motives, and goals of the state. I think that's what's going on here in the United States, at least from the standpoint of the Democrats. That's what they're trying to implement. So, the managerial methods under such a system are applied to elections. Managed democracy is the application of managerial skill to the basic democratic political institution of popular elections. By using managerial methods and developing management of elections, Wallen argues that the democracy of the United States has become sanitized of political participation. Therefore, managed democracy is, quote, a political form in which governments are legitimated by elections that they have learned to control, unquote. Under managed democracy, the electorate is prevented from having a significant impact on policies adopted by the state because of the opinion construction, and also manipulation carried out by means of technology, social science, contracts, and corporate subsidies. The managerial methods are also the means by which state and global corporations unite so that corporations increasingly assume governmental functions and services, and corporations become still more dependent on the state. A main object of managed democracy is privatization and the extension of the private, together with reduction of governmental responsibility for the welfare of the citizens. According to Wallen, the United States has two main totalizing dynamics. The first, directed outward, finds its expression in the global war on terror and in the Bush doctrine that the United States has the right to launch preemptive wars. Wallen and Hedges argued that this amounts to the United States seeing as illegitimate the attempt by any state to resist its domination. And the second dynamic, directed inward, involves the subjection of the mass of the populace to economic rationalization, unquote, with continual, quote, downsizing, unquote, and, quote, outsourcing, unquote, of jobs abroad, and dismantling of what remains of the welfare state created by President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal and President Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society. Neoliberalism is an integral component of inverted totalitarianism. The state of insecurity in which this places the public serves the useful function of making people feel helpless, therefore making it less likely they will become politically active and thus helping maintain the first of the dynamics. And so that is the essence of it. That is the essence of it. Here's a quote from Kevin Zeese and Margaret Flowers of the Green Party. We are living in a time of inverted totalitarianism in which the tools used to maintain the status quo are much more subtle and technologically advanced. These include propaganda and major media outlets that hide the real news about conditions at home and our activities around the world behind distractions. Yet another tool is to create insecurity in the population so that people are unwilling to speak out and take risks for fear of losing their jobs. Changes in college education also silence dissent. Adjunct professors are less willing to teach topics that are viewed as controversial. This, combined with massive student debt, are tools to silence the student population, once the center of transformative action. Chris Hedges has argued that the liberal class is unable to reform itself, and that classical liberalism has been reduced to a political charade that is stage managed within corporate capitalism. According to Hedges, political philosophers like Wallen are excluded from publications like the New York Times and the New York Review of Books because academic intellectuals and scientists prize access to power rather than truth. The book, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, 2012, by Chris Hedges and Joe Sacco, portrays inverted totalitarianism as a system where corporations have corrupted and subverted democracy and where economics bests politics. Every natural resource and living being is commodified and exploited by large corporations to the point of collapse as excess consumerism and commercialism lull and manipulate the citizenry into surrendering their liberties and their participation in government. Dennis Ray Morgan adds that in addition to the concentration of raw political power, technology is helping to lead the world towards the type of inverted totalitarianism seen in 1984 and Brave New World. So, that's the characterization of inverted totalitarianism by Sheldon Wallen. We can see immediately the concept is much different from that, of fascism. And let us move now to a piece by Tom Hartman, March 29, 2024, which will give us his characterization, of fascism. Title of the book is Recognizing the Fascists in Our Midst and Supporting Those Fighting Back. Donald Trump and his MAGA movement check every single box in the fascism playbook. We all have a role to play in making sure they are not allowed to seize power. Tom says fascism doesn't typically take over countries by military means, World War II's temporary order notwithstanding. Instead, it relies on rhetoric, words, speeches, news conferences, rallies, media, money, and they all point in one direction. Huh? And promises. Yes, and promises, but I'm reading from Tom now, so it's like what he says. They all point in one direction: violence in service of the fascist leader. The rhetorical embrace and appreciation of violence is one of the cardinal characteristics of fascism, and a big step was taken this week in a New York City courtroom to push back against the current fascist campaign being waged by Donald Trump against our American form of government, noting that Trump's statements were threatening and inflammatory and denigrating, quote unquote. Judge Juan Mershon imposed a gag order on the orange fraudster and rapist, forbidding him from further attacks against the court staff, the DA staff, the witnesses and jurors, and also the judge, incidentally. Why? Because all were concerned about becoming the victims of Trump's fascist army. Because the judge omitted himself from the list, as it's his job to try to send bad guys to prison. Trump got slick and attacked the judge's daughter, who's also not on the list. Now she's getting death threats. Isn't that amazing? She's getting death threats. Because she's the daughter of the judge. And he wants to threaten the judge who is threatening him. This isn't the first time. Whenever Trump finds himself in trouble, fraud or violence follow, as has already been determined by a court in New York this month, and we saw in the pattern of his presidency. As Colorado's Secretary of State, Jenna Griswold, told Chris Hayes last night about the Trump era in January 6, 2021, the threat of violence is part of their new playbook. When Trump repeatedly attacked Judge Engoron, who presided over the civil fraud trial that led to his $454 million fine, his fascist fanboy sent envelopes of white powder both to the judge and the prosecutor and phoned in a bomb threat to the judge's home. Professor Jennifer Mercieka, author of Demagogue for President, The Rhetorical Genius of Donald Trump, notes, Donald Trump has a history of refusing to follow the rule of law. He incited an insurrection against the peaceful transfer of power. She says transferal of power. I think it's transfer. He claims to want to be a dictator, quote unquote, if he wins power, and he has released plans to install people into government who are loyal to him instead of the Constitution. These are all signs that he plans an autocratic takeover of the United States, unquote. Analysts of fascism, from Umberto Eco to Hannah Arendt to Timothy Snyder and Ruth Ben-Ghiat, especially agree on a core set of characteristics of a fascist movement that includes a romantic idealization of a fictional past, as in Make America Great Again, a clear definition of an enemy within that is not quite human but an other, as in, quote, vermin, unquote, rats, quote unquote, animals, quote unquote, all phrases Trump has used just in past weeks to describe immigrants and employees of our criminal justice system. Then there's vilification of the media, quote, fake news, unquote, or Lügenpresse, as in Nazi Germany, the lying press, Lügenpresse. Repeated attacks on minorities and immigrants as a rallying point for followers. Shared hatred often binds people together. Disparagement of elections and the rule of law, because neither favors the fascist movement. Glorification of political violence, K and martyrdom. The January 6th Patriots and Ashley Babbitt. Hostility to academia and science, leading to the elevation of Joe's six-pack's ability to, quote, do his own research, unquote. Simple answers to complex questions. Embrace the fundamentalists of religion and the moral codes associated with it. Rejection of the rights of women and members of the queer community as part of the celebration of toxic masculinity. Constant lies, even about seemingly inconsequential matters. Hannah Arendt noted 1978, quote, if everybody always lies to you, the consequence is not that you believe the lies, but rather that nobody believes anything any longer, unquote. Performative patriotism that replaces the true obligations of citizenship, like voting and staying informed. I think that's a very limited set of true obligations of citizenship, but okay. With jingoistic slogans, logos, and mass events, as in faux populism. collaboration with oligarchs while claiming to celebrate the average person. Well, all this is very interesting, but I thought it would also be interesting to for you to see a characterization of fascism of mine, which I hopefully can locate very quickly here. Ah, yes. That's a doc file. Okay. So let me. Okay, let me see if I can easily access this now. I'm not getting a true opening, so I'm just going to give you the characteristics. Maybe I can do it this way. I hope I can't get to it that way. So I'm just going to talk you through it. So, one of the characteristics of fascism, in my view, is extreme emphasis on nationalism, the emotional commitment to one's nation and its leader as a single, unified, organic entity, superior to all others and deserving of loyalty, which is absolute. That's not too different from some of the characteristics cited by Tom, but then also totalitarianism, including continuous top down mobilization of the population, accompanied by intense and constant surveillance. You didn't see this in the characterization by Tom, but that's very important. Continuous propagandizing by mass media, hewing to a party line defined by the state, its leader, and a single party intertwined with it, and denial of zones of privacy. You didn't see characteristics stated in quite that way in the synthesis by Tom. A planned, collaborative, state controlled economy in which productive, disciplined people of all classes work together against the parasitic elements in society. When I say parasitic here, I mean the elements defined as parasitic by the fascists, to achieve the economic goals set by the state, including the goal of autarky. That was characteristic of Nazism and characteristic of Italian fascism as well. Further characteristics: respect for the capitalist profit motive and for the primary role of productive, privately owned corporations and businesses in a command economy. This is not in the characterization given by Tom, and it's so very important. It was Fascism was defined by Mussolini as the synthesis of the corporation with the state. Fascism was dedicated to profit making by the corporations. And this was characteristic of Nazism too, even though Nazism was much more explicit about the state overall. Support for social welfare programs serving social integration with the national organic unity, opposition to egalitarianism. What do I mean by support for social welfare programs? Well, in Nazi Germany, there was universal health care. There were pensions for people as well. There was a welfare state that was part of it. Going on, direct, often violent action supported by an ideology of social Darwinism directed against opponents of the state, both external and internal. And you can see similarities here to the things advocated by Donald Trump. I don't think the ideology of social Darwinism was emphasized very much by Tom Hartman, but it's very, very important to fascism. The militarization of the police, external militarism, emphasis on youth and its role in direct action. These were all emphases of classical fascism. And I think they would be emphases for Trump also. He's indicated as much in his statements about what he would do if he was reelected president. Strong commitment to traditional male-female roles and to, quote, non-deviant heterosexual behavior, accompanied by strong opposition to, quote, homosexual and other behavior it deems to be deviant, quote unquote. This was very characteristic of Italian fascism and especially Nazism. Finally, commitment to purging of decadent behavior and forms of modernism, regenerating the moral character of a nation. So those were the characters that I dug out of the literature on fascism. You should note that they are somewhat difficult. There's an overlap. Certainly there's an overlap on many things. But it seems to me an understanding of fascism would require both the characteristics emphasized by Tom and also the ones that I emphasize. There is, of course, some overlap, but I think you can see in the movement of Donald Trump and his statements about what he would do, if he were reelected, that he overlaps many of the characteristics stated here by Tom and also many of the characteristics that I've stated. But going on with Tom's article. So did the American Confederacy and the Democratic Party it seized in the 1860s, and the American fascist movements of the 1920s and 30s, albeit they were much smaller, and the white supremacy movement of the mid-20th century, from the KKK to the White Citizens Councils, ditto. Yes, ditto. This is not our first encounter with fascism, as I detail in the hidden history of American oligarchy. Nor will it be our last. Fascism has a long history and an enduring appeal for insecure, angry psychopaths who want to seize political power and the great wealth of opportunity that are usually associated with it. The good news is when fascist movements seize entire countries or territories, their rule, at least in the last few centuries, tends to be fleeting. The Confederacy lasted only 6 years and failed in their attempt to take over our country. Hitler held power for a mere 12 years. Mussolini for 21 years. The bad news is that when fascist movements do seize power, absolute power in a nation, they do incredible damage, recovery from which often requires generations. They typically are only dislodged by war, with a loss in that war finally puncturing the bubble of invincibility and the aura of strongman infallibility in which their leaders have wrapped themselves. Preventing a fascist takeover is not particularly complex. There are encouraging signs that America is beginning to move in this direction. It involves a few simple steps. Recognize and call out the fascists and their movement as fascists. With Trump and his fascist MAGA movement, this is happening with greater and greater frequency. Yesterday, for example, the Financial Times highly worldwide respected columnist Martin Wolf published an article titled "Fascism is Change, but it is not dead." Quote, "What we are now seeing," Wolf writes, "is not just authoritarianism, it is authoritarian with fascistic characteristics." He concludes his op-ed with, quote, "History does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. It is rhyming now. Do not be complacent. It is dangerous to take a ride on fascism," unquote. For top columnists in one of the world's senior financial publications to call a candidate for the U.S. president and his movement fascists would have been unthinkable at any other time in modern American history, and it's happening with greater and greater frequency across all aspects of American media. Debunk and ridicule extremism while ostracizing fascists from polite company. Increasingly, Trump's fascist movements and those aligned with it are becoming caricatures of themselves. Book banners and disruptors of public education are reaching the end of their fad-like existence. Moms for Liberty is a sad joke founded by some of the country's more bizarre examples of hypocrisy. The former head of the RNC was fired from NBC for her participation in Trump's fascist attempt to overthrow our government, and CPAC has shriveled into a hardcore rump, pun intended, faction of the conservative movement. Political cartoonists lampoon Trump's followers as toothless rubes and obese, gun-obsessed men. So many women are rejecting Republicans as dating partners that both sociologists and media have noticed. And the GOP is looking at a possible bloodbath, to use Trump's favorite term, this November, regardless of how many billions in dark money their billionaires throw into the races. We saw the first indicator of that this week in Alabama. Yes, when a woman running on choice actually won the race for Congress in a district, in Alabama, that had been ruled by the GOP for a very, very long time. The choice issue won in Alabama, the last place where we would have expected it to win. Going on with the article, support democratic institutions and politicians who promote democracy. The media landscape of America has become centralized with a handful of massive and mostly conservative corporations and billionaires owning the majority of our newspapers, radio and TV stations, and online publications. Nonetheless, there are many great online publications beating the drum for democracy, and many allow subscriptions or donations. My list includes Raw Story, Alternate, Daily Cost, Common Dreams, Salon, Talking Points Memo, The New Republic, Mother Jones, The Nation, The Guardian, Democratic Underground, Jacobin, Op-Ed News, Slate, and Free Speech TV. It's a very partial list, I think. In addition, there are dozens of worthwhile publications that share this Substack platform with Hartman Report. You can find my recommendations here, and I'm live daily on SiriusXM Channel 127 Progress and on Free Speech TV, as are many of my progressive colleagues. Read, use, listen, share, and support them. There are also multiple organizations dedicated to promoting democracy, democratic values in America. They range from your local Democratic Party, and here we get to, is a local Democratic Party realize he promoting democracy uh, and democratic values, okay, in America, or is the local Democratic Party promoting vote blow of vote blue no matter who and inverted totalitarianism? Then there's indivisible, also progressive Democrats of America. Again, the same question: are they promoting democracy or vote blue no matter who, or inverted totalitarianism? The move to amend, also moveon.org, Roots Action, Progressive Change Campaign Committee. Again, vote blue no matter who, inverted totalitarianism. What do they really stand for? They cave to Biden frequently and completely. Next. Other democratic institutions we should be supporting by joining, donating, or participating in their governance include public schools, libraries, city councils, county government groups. When MAGA fascists show up to disrupt these institutions and intimidate their members, we should be there to defend them. President Biden speaking last fall at an event honoring John McCain, uh, not exactly the most democratic of office holders, I might add, in the sense of small d democratic, laid it on the line and challenged all of us. Quote, as I've said before, we're at an inflection point in our history, one of those moments that only happens once every few generations, where the decisions we make today will determine the course of this country and the world for decades to come. Quote, so you, me, and every American who is committed to preserving our democracy carry a special responsibility. We have to stand up for America's values embodied in our Declaration of Independence. How about in our Constitution? Because we know MAGA extremists have already proven they won't. We have to stand up for our Constitution and the institutions of democracy because MAGA extremists have made clear they won't. History is watching, the world is watching, most important, our children and grandchildren, okay, are watching. Tag, wear it. So, here is a wonderful characterization of fascism, attacking Trump with it and his MAGA movement with it. Fine, fine. But when it comes to fighting it, what does Tom Hartman say? He says, join together with the vote blue no matter who people. Ridicule the fascists. Fight against the fascists. While you support what? Not democracy. Because we're not having democracy. We're obviously having inverted totalitarianism here. Obviously, that is what, okay, is going on here. And if somebody says, no, the Democratic Party is democratic, it's pushing policies that are for democracy, we just have to ask here, okay, a series of questions. Where does the Democratic Party stand when it comes to managing, okay, its primaries? Was a Democratic primary this year not rigged for Donald Trump? Isn't that what forced the withdrawal of Bobby Kennedy from the primary? Isn't that what has neutered the campaigns, okay, of Marianne Williamson and other candidates as well? Doesn't, okay, the Democratic Party engage in the suppression of third parties in order to rig elections? So the only two people who have a chance to win elections are whoever the Republican Party selects and Joe Biden, okay, the incumbent, who is obviously not fit to be the president anymore, not physically fit enough, mentally fit enough to be the president for 4 more years. Okay, it is obvious what's the Democratic Party been doing. It's been managing democracy so Joe Biden becomes the nominee of the Democratic Party. Am I lying, or is that what has been happening? What has been happening if not the suppression of the minor parties and the third parties? What's behind the failure to give to Bobby Kennedy, who was constantly threatened, civil service protection? Obviously, what's behind it is the desire for Kennedy to provide his own protection, spend lots and lots of money on it, so he doesn't have the money to challenge Joe Biden in the general election, since he's now running as an independent. What happens in our inverted totalitarian system when the public overwhelmingly wants something, such as Medicare for all? Does Medicare for all even have a chance of receiving a vote in the Congress? Why not? Isn't democracy in the Congress being managed by the seniority system and by the control the Speaker has in the House and the Majority Leader, okay, in the Senate? Aren't those organizations hierarchical, okay, and oligarchical? Don't they stop things that are favored overwhelmingly by the populace from getting a hearing, even, much less a vote? Isn't that what's going on all the time? And isn't that something that neither the Democratic Party nor the Republican Party will disrupt? We have a choice, okay, in this election. We can vote for the fascist, or we can vote for the inverted totalitarian who suppresses choices every day of the year, who runs foreign policy without consultation, who has gotten us deeply into 2 wars, one involving a genocide and the other involving considerable risk of nuclear war, which the head of the Democratic Party, the President of the United States, insists on doing everything to continue, at least through the election, so that he doesn't have to explain why he lost the war in Ukraine. He doesn't want to face that. So he's willing to give $61 billion more to continue a war that there is utterly no chance to win. And of course, he works with the media to suppress serious discussion of that war. The suppression has been going on for years. The fable that the war was started by the Russians through invasion in 2022, rather than by the coups sponsored by America in Ukraine in 2014. All this is just fable, and constantly clothing us, okay, in the idea that we still have a democracy, while the man and his administration work every day to suppress any real bottom-up democracy in America, in league with the mass media, in league with the cable networks, in league with the major newspapers, undermining liberal democracy. Remember, whereas the classical totalitarian government was an ordered, idealized, and coordinated whole, which is what Donald Trump is threatening, inverted totalitarianism is a managed democracy which applies managerial skills to basic democratic political institutions, such as elections, such as the Congress, such as the Supreme Court. What happened to the Supreme Court? Managerial skills were applied to ensure that the Supreme Court would be the most anti-democratic Supreme Court in ages. In ages, a throwback to the 19th century. In the United States, the role of propaganda is inverted, remember, because American propaganda, quote, is only in part a state-centered phenomenon. According to this model, dissent is allowed, though the corporate media serve as a filter, allowing most people with limited time available to keep themselves apprised of current events to hear only points of view that the corporate media deem, quote, serious, unquote. Isn't that what we're getting with the Democratic Party? The election is framed as a choice between fascism and saving democracy. But obviously, if saving democracy means re-electing Joe Biden, we're not saving democracy, we would be saving inverted totalitarianism here in the United States. Isn't that clear as a bell now? Inverted totalitarianism once again reverses things. It is all politics all the time, but politics largely untempered by the political. And what is the political again? The commitment to finding where the common good lies amidst the welter of well-financed, hardly organized, single-minded interests, rapidly seeking government favors and overwhelming the practices of representative government and public administration by a sea of cash. Isn't that what has happened here in the United States? Isn't that what the administration of Joe Biden finds itself in the middle of? Trying to manage this network of interests, besieged by a sea of cash, subordinate to the sea of cash, mired in Israel because of the sea of cash, and fear that the sea of cash will move over to the fascists if the inverted totalitarians don't play this right. What we have now is a choice between fascist America and inverted totalitarian America, which is the choice we are living with now. It's a choice that talks about austerity, selling off Social Security to the private sector, of course, busting unions, still outsourcing jobs. It's a choice that emphasizes austerity, and it looks for austerity policies to avoid the commitment to finding where the common good lies amidst the welter of well-financed, highly organized, single-minded interests, rapidly seeking governmental favors and overwhelming the practices of representative government public administration by a sea of cash. You know, the Donald Trumps and Joe Bidens of the world don't want to see a huge mass of the populace going to the polls and voting. They want to see low electoral turnouts where only their intense supporters go and vote, so that they can have this faux contest between the two of them, where most people stay home because they don't believe that voting is going to do them any good. While classical totalitarian regimes had charismatic leaders that were the architects of the state, which Donald Trump is trying to be, of course, he's trying to build a fascism with himself as the charismatic leader, as the architect of the state. Inverted totalitarianism does not depend on a certain leader, but produces its leaders who are akin to corporate leaders. Biden, obviously, is akin to a corporate leader. He is the gray man. Maybe the Democrats will decide in the end not to run the gray man if the polling seems too ridiculous in the end. Maybe at the last minute, they'll pull things out and give us another gray man who is akin to a corporate leader, like, for example, the governor of California, Mr. Gavin Newsom, or maybe the governor of Michigan, Ms. Gretchen Whitmer, a corporate lady. While Nazism made life uncertain for the wealthy and privileged and had a social policy for the working class, inverted totalitarianism exploits the poor by reducing health and social programs and weakening working conditions. In that way, inverted totalitarianism is worse than Nazism for the poor. One of the things that historically seemed to distinguish inverted totalitarianism from Nazism or fascism was the tendency of fascism to get involved in war, constantly to get involved in war. But recently, what we've seen in our own version of inverted totalitarianism is a tendency to get involved in wars all over the globe, to have bases all over the globe, and to intervene at various points all over the globe. 800 bases all over the globe. And here we are getting involved in brush fire wars, of various kinds. We have now been involved in continuous warfare somewhere in the world for a very long time. We're always intervening, overthrowing regimes, in various ways, getting bases in various places so our military can influence politics, in other nations. In spite of the fact that our leaders are corporate leaders and not really charismatic, we still find it not just possible, but very likely that we will be involved in wars that risk our nuclear ruin and that are deadly for those who are involved in those wars. Of course, the war in Ukraine has been mostly deadly for the Ukrainians. There seems a consensus now that at least 500,000 of them have died, and maybe more. And about half the population of Ukraine has left and gone to other places where they would not be killed. And why did we want to do this? For foreign policy goals such as breaking up the Russian Federation and replacing Mr. Putin, who, by the way, for all his faults, for all his many faults, has not forgotten the political. He has not forgotten his commitment to finding where the common good lies in Russia. That distinguishes him vastly from both Donald Trump and Joseph R. Biden. Biden, the Robinette, who took his middle name seriously. Couldn't resist that one, folks. By using managerial methods and developing the management of elections, Wallen argues that the democracy of the United States becomes sanitized of political participation. Therefore, managed democracy is, quote, a political form in which governments are legitimated by elections that they have learned to control. Wasn't this the case when the elections of 2016 and 2020 were managed to defeat Bernie Sanders, a politician who was running on the slogan of "Not Me, Us," and who was fostering the idea of bottom-up democracy here in the United States. And those who defeated him managed democracy within the Democratic Party in order to beat him, in order to win, an election, because people were fed up with the chaos created by Trump. The point here is the choice between fascism and inverted totalitarianism, between Trump and Biden, is still an unacceptable choice. It has not become less unacceptable because the political system continues to move towards that particular choice. What am I doing here tonight? I am pleading once again. I think Robinette means the little robber, but I may be mistaken about that, Andy Candy. But anyway, what we're looking at here is an unacceptable choice. And we're still accepting it. We're still looking at it and thinking about staying home. We're not building a movement that would empower some of the candidates who would look for the common good, such as Cornel West, such as Jill Stein. They at least would look for the common good. They at least have not forgotten, the political. We have not gotten behind them. We have not created a movement behind them because most of us have been too busy doing other things. No political movement has arisen which can challenge the money behind the fascist on the one hand and the inverted totalitarian on the other. So what is to be done? If anybody has an idea of how to create a dump the corruption movement, that could negate their candidacies, then please put one forward, because the dump the corruption movement that I try to create has failed. Right now, with 7 months to go, the only realistic policy or the only realistic alternative for someone to disrupt this unacceptable choice might be Robert F. Kennedy. But the problems with Robert F. Kennedy are legion. I've discussed those problems in at least 4 different streams now, and I'm not going to repeat them in any detail again. There are problems like he won't fight for Medicare for all. He seems to have no plans to shackle the Supreme Court. He won't get rid of the filibuster. He is unutterably attached to the idea that the federal debt in the United States is a problem. And he repeats the moronic slogans of the Petersonians and the Austerians. He sounds like someone who would be just as bad as the inverted totalitarian and the fascist. He sounds like someone who, if he were president now, would be supporting the genocide, the same as Biden has and the same as Trump would have. I was talking to a friend of mine today who kept pointing out Trump has not supported the genocide. He has not been the one to do it. I kept saying he certainly would have. I mean, God damn it. His son-in-law used to room with Netanyahu. The Netanyahu, Jared Kushner, Donald Trump connection is very, very strong. Is very, very strong. So there's no way Trump can be an acceptable choice for any reason. Some folks think that Trump is more likely to keep us out of war than Biden. Yeah, like Trump isn't going to go after the Chinese. Biden has been too busy to go after the Chinese. So that's it. Now let's discuss Bobby Kennedy some more, since he is now coming up here in response to my comments. Let me start going through the comments. Okay. Andy says, hi, Joe. Putting kids in the tub will be soapy and listening via headphones. I mentioned Dump the Corruption, Inverted Totalitarian on Richard Maher's stream earlier today. How ironic. And Andonia Svetlana says, buona notte. Thank you, Andonia. And Steve Wolfbrand says hi to everybody. Kay says hi to everybody. Kay Ryan is here. Hello, people. I tried to share the groups, but I got extended jail time due to speaking and sharing more truth upsy bad. Israel not God's chosen, more like the devil's own family. Yes. Yes, as Miko Peled said in a recent stream where he was a guest, the Israelis are the Nazis of the current age, or words to that effect. Joe Logan said, my bad. In the other comment, Steve says, Kay, your fave. Joe Logan, what you all need to realize that all this shit show is a circle jerk because politicians made it where they cannot be held accountable or jailed for any criminal activity while they are politicians. That's true. And they keep doing more and more of that. Kay Ron says, yes, he is. I've learned a lot from him over the years. Me too. Obviously, he said a lot of good things in that piece. But he came out at the end in his usual way, which is basically vote blue no matter who, which means he's accepting the inverted totalitarianism choice. I'm glad he's not accepting the fascist choice. He's been fighting against that all year, over the last 2 or 3, even more than that. But he keeps coming down on the side of inverted totalitarianism. There was a brief period of democracy to 1960 and 1963. We all know how that worked out. Well, it still was not a democracy then. Remember, segregation still had not been broken, in the South. And he says, does Tom realize he's supporting genocide with his blue no matter who rhetoric? I don't know. I'm sure people have mentioned it to him. How is Tom so spot on important issues but blatantly blind when it comes to Democrats? Joe, so do you think Newsom is totally out now? No, I don't think he's totally out. I think there's still a chance that at the last minute, the DNC will decide it has to replace Joe Biden with somebody because he just can't win. Well, by the way, is he going to avoid debating Trump? Because if he doesn't, Trump is going to drub him, in debates. Biden can't handle any debates right now. That's why they rigged the primary in the way they did. They took away our democratic right to hear people debate. That's what they did. Doc, how will Iran respond to the bombing of their embassy in Syria? They will respond in an appropriate and measured way, doing everything they can to avoid escalation into a regional war. Because Iran knows it will not gain from a regional war if the United States comes in. Obviously, what's being done here by Israel is trying to goad Iran and Hezbollah and the other members of the Axis of Resistance into a regional war. And then Israel will scream for help, by the United States. Try to get us even more thoroughly involved than we are now. Steve, I don't like the escalation against Iran. It won't end well at all. Also saw more U.S. bases getting bombed last night in the Middle East. This needs to end before it escalates further. Right on, Brandy. Putin was also just reelected by the people of Russia with, I might add, 87.8% of the vote or something like that. And by the way, people who have observed that vote and who are in touch with what was happening in Russia assure us that that was an honest election and an honest vote. Andy Candy says, Robinette means warhawk, thug, butcher. I thought it just meant, the little robber, but I may be mistaken about that. Kay says, love Bernie. And Steve says, please don't remind us of Bernie Sanders. Steve, I'm not reminding you of Bernie Sanders. I'm reminding you of bottom-up democracy and the difference between bottom-up democracy and what both Trump and Biden are selling. They're selling different things, but neither one of them is selling democracy. Brandy says, I'll never support Bernie again. Well, I'm sure you won't have occasion to because I don't think he's going to run. Steve says, Cornell is a joke. I don't think he'll be on any ballots. I don't know. I don't think he has the funding to be on any ballots. We're now hearing it costs $30 million to be on all ballots. Okay, now maybe with the organization of the Green Party over many, many years, they may be able to get, on most ballots. Okay, and libertarians similarly. But a new movement that's not attached to any party to get on all the ballots, not without an extreme amount of money backing them up. Isn't that why the elites keep us so desperate and distracted so that we don't see straight and folks automatically overlook Bobby, Jill, Cornell, and Marianne? Of course. Of course. Brandy says Dems are trying to go after third party independent ballot access again, like they did in 2022 with Ho and 2020 Green Party complaints. So, by the way, I have 25 people watching here now. It would be wonderful if I could get 25 likes, maybe 25 shares, and for those who are not subscribed, whatever number of subscribes. Please do that little thing for me. It helps the stream. And so Bobby is just another inverted totalitarian who uphold the idiocy of the parliamentarian, laugh out loud like the Robinette. I don't know if Bobby really is. Bobby has expressed immense stupidity during this campaign in a number of different areas. I didn't even cover all of them. But Bobby has a number of things he is running on which are very, very important. The most important of them is the end of censorship by the powers that be. Second most important is shackling and regulating the corporations. Success in that realm would end inverted totalitarianism and also neoliberalism at the same time. But yes, Bobby makes all kinds of statements suggesting that even if he would not uphold the idiocy of the parliamentarian, that there are other idiocies that he would uphold. Like, for example, he made the open statement that the filibuster in the Senate was a democratic institution. I've never heard a bigger line of nonsense in my life. Steve says, what have the Chinese ever done to us, or Russia for that matter? Well, the Chinese opposed us, of course, in the Korean War, but that was very, very long ago. What have the Chinese ever done to us in the last 40 years, let's say? Nothing, except to collaborate with our capitalist class to offshore our industries and create a much higher state of unemployment here. They've done that to us. But that's not why the elites are now supporting war against them. The reason why the elites are doing that now is because they understand that China is an economic threat to them, that China no longer intends to be the slave to U.S. capitalism, but to support both Chinese capitalism and Chinese national interests. That is, what they don't like. And as for Russia, we practically did in Russia as a world power in the 1990s. We practically destroyed any possibility they would become a world power again. But then the miracle of Putin happened, and he brought them back. So what the Russians did to us is to rebuild their own country and make them a world power again. And we didn't like that, because our foreign policy is to be the only dominant power in the whole world. Do you prefer fascism A or fascist B? Do you prefer genocide A or genocide B? I don't think it's as simple as that. There is a fascism A, and there is an inverted totalitarian B. And what's complex about it is that it's the inverted totalitarian B which is into genocide right now. And fascist A is not into genocide right now. But who knows what he'll do if he gets into power and sets up a dictatorship he's talking about. Do you think if he does that, that any of us will escape the concentration camp? Is there anybody who really thinks that? Maybe some people with a little bit of money will be able to escape that if they keep their mouths shut. But people like us who want to speak out and who want to resist and who want to create something good, we will find ourselves in concentration camps under fascist A, but not under inverted totalitarian B. Under inverted totalitarian B, we would just be neutralized and neuterized and symbolically castrated and removed of all power and all say. But we probably won't lose our Social Security checks. And Brandy says, I just can't with Bobby and his support for Israel. I can't get that dirty taste out of my mouth. And Brandy, I entirely agree. I feel the same way. I'm not for Bobby yet, but I am for badgering him and talking with him in any way that we can and criticizing him and exposing him to the truth in hopes that he will change his Israeli line of thinking. He can still talk about his love for Israel. He can talk about his family support for the Chalutzim. He can talk about he has loved Israeli democracy when it was a democracy. He can talk about wanting to save the Israeli state, but he just has to be very clear, and he has to abandon the genocide and the ideology of Zionism. That he has to stop that, and he has to start talking about what Israel has to do to save itself. And that, of course, is to give the Palestinians their rights and their due. Bobby has to defend the Palestinians at this point if he wants to make clear the difference between himself and the others. And then he has to stop saying that he's going to end chronic disease in this country, while out of the other side of his mouth he says he's not going to fight for Medicare for all because it's too heavy a lift. How do you end chronic disease here in the United States without legislating the Medicare for all program? Because poor people and middle class people won't be able to afford ending the factors that are causing chronic disease. It will be the rich and parts of the middle class that will buy into the personal measures that have to be taken to end chronic disease. But the rest of us won't be able to afford it. He hasn't come to realize that yet. He doesn't realize that he can't get anything significant through Congress if he doesn't get rid of the filibuster. There has to be democracy in the Senate. Brandy says, our politicians, like Biden and Clinton, helped with exporting jobs and industry. We can't solely blame China for that. No, we can't. Of course we can't. We wanted China to do the manufacturing. Our oligarchs became oligarchs in many instances because they did that. So I'm not solely blaming China. But I'm not ignoring the damage that our economic policies towards China caused. Those were neoliberal policies, and they are to blame for exporting jobs and industry. And you're right, politicians like Biden and Clinton, and don't forget the two Bushes, okay, and Ronald Reagan, they all helped. All the neoliberals helped. They're all to blame. Andy Candy. Nazis had health care and pensions. Great lesson learned, Joe. Thank you for your tutelage. Don't forget, the first one to bring universal health care to a modern state was Otto von Bismarck, the prime minister, okay, of Germany, and the man who created, okay, the German state in order to undercut social democracy in Germany. He passed a universal health care program in Germany and pensions, both of which exist until today. He did this in 1870, 1871, around there. Goes back to 1871. The Nazis didn't change that. Andy says, you got bubbles in my eyes. Sorry, Andy. Bernie says he's run from anyone who's tried to, Joe, refuses to have those discussions. Nevertheless, we have to try. We have to continue to try. We can't build to dump the corruption movement in 7 months. It won't happen because we don't have any money behind us. We have to convert, Bobby. We at least have to try. I know he's avoided it all because he's trying to run smart. He's trying to avoid distractions while he focuses on getting ballots in 50 states. But nevertheless, we're not going to get change from Biden, and we're not going to get change from Trump, except changes we don't like. In both cases, we're going to get changes we don't like. One thing about Bobby Kennedy, he wants support that would otherwise go to Trump, and he wants support that would otherwise go to Biden. So eventually he's going to have to open himself up, for discussions. He's going to have to do something about the genocide, in Israel. Because if he's tagged with that genocide, as he is now, he's coming close to being tagged with it, then he's not going to get enough of a vote to beat them both, which is what he has to do. And he says the only change the butcher gave us is the change, in our pockets. He gave us some change in our pockets. Both butchers gave us some change, in our pockets. Both butchers did. Anyway, I think I'm done for tonight. Brandy says, Andy Candy, I love Timu. It helps our family a lot during Christmas and birthdays. So Timu is is a welfare program for the poor. We've bought a couple of things from them too, but we can't stand their attempts to upsell us all the time. They have a very aggressive upselling program. It helps our family a lot during Christmas and birthdays. It really does. Okay, so Dee has her show. It's still on, okay, with Madeline. After I get off here, I'm probably going to join it, okay, if I can. Temu is the Chinese version of Amazon, I know. And Brandy says, I got 7 pairs of decent shoes for under $10. Yeah, you can get some real good deals from Temu. We've gotten some real good deals from Temu ourselves. Steve says, good night, everybody. So I suppose my message for tonight is we should engage like hell to change Bobby's mind when it comes to key issues. I suppose in closing, I might as well summarize what the key things are. One, of course, is the filibuster. 2 is Medicare for all. 3 is taking big money from contributors. I know that sounds very silly now, but now, with Nicole Shanahan on the ticket, he has as much money from big donors as he will ever need. He's right, he can get his message out with $500 million. He should see to it that the heavy majority of those dollars are from small donors, so that he owes something to the small donors who supported him. But among the big donors, he only owes something to Nicole. That is still possible. He needs to change on Israel or Palestine. He needs to change his idiocy when it comes to federal debts and deficits. He was on Aaron Burnett's show on CNN either yesterday or today. I'm not sure which day it was. I didn't happen to notice it. And he was doing a little ranting about the size of the federal debt, how he's going to end that particular problem. Unless he ends that particular problem by recognizing that it's not really a problem and by minting platinum coins or introducing overt congressional financing, I don't want to hear about it. If he's talking about increasing taxes, I'm all for increasing taxes to disempower the rich, so I won't mind that. But he should recognize, as I have recognized, that there's not enough you can get from income taxes, okay, and from property taxes of the kind that exist right now from the rich to end the federal debt. Not enough money for that. That money can only come from getting the Federal Reserve to produce new money through the techniques that I have mentioned. He's got to be much more aggressive about the climate emergency. And finally, he's got to start talking about neutering the Supreme Court. If only to get the choice vote over the other 2. But also, if he really wants his presidency to be a success, he's got to add 6 more justices to the Supreme Court if and when he becomes the president of the United States. So those are the things we have to talk to him about. Those are the changes we have to get in his campaign. I hope that maybe Nicole Shanahan will become an ally in this. She says that she's a progressive. Of course, that word is fairly meaningless. We know it means something to her. What it probably means to her is that she wants to innovate. She wants to do some new things. And she thinks that, okay, is being a progressive. I think we have to teach her what a progressive is when it comes to policy. So that's it. I think I'm going to end on that note. Tomorrow, I'll be back with my foreign policy program. I'll be back at 9 p.m. Okay, tomorrow with my weekly long show on foreign policy. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm still being watched by 25 people. I consider that, okay, a good night. I hope you will all share, like, and subscribe. Andy Candy says, fantastic live stream tonight. Mwah. Thank you, Andy. And Andy says, oh, good, they're asleep. I can catch Dee and Madeline. You can. And I'm going to go over there right now and catch them as well. Good night.